Thank you so much for joining today on our panel that is going to dive into the topic of whiteness and white supremacy in environmentalism. I know that all of you participants can't see us, but we are so happy and grateful that you're here. Thanks so much for devoting your very valuable evening time to join Uplift today. My name is Olivia Juarez. I am based in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I am a part of the Uplift Climate Justice Committee. Uplift is a collective of young people defined ages 18 to 30-ish with the common goal of creating climate justice throughout the Southwest. Our main reason for existing is to connect, train, and mobilize young people for climate justice. Our work is rooted in grassroots communities, the landscapes and waters of the Colorado Plateau and the greater Southwest. And our focus is on uplifting young people on the front lines of the climate crisis to take climate action into their own hands and create the futures that we want to live in based off of our own visions. Thank you so much for joining. Today we are joined by David, Ashley, and Cody, who are each representing a different area that we thought would bring a good perspective to talk about recreation, the pleasure that it brings us as individuals, and each of us as activists and community organizers in our region. Cody is going to be joining us from the field as they are in a conservation corps. And so we'll turn to Cody for an introduction when they are able to log on. But for now, why don't we start with self-introductions. David and Ashley, I'll just invite one of you to go first as you see fit. Why don't you give a self-introduction to our audience by stating whatever you want to say about yourself, why you're invested in outdoor recreation, and what brought you to the work, as well as what the experience of outdoor recreation gives to you. And then also if you want to talk about a place or recreational activity that brings you joy.
All right. My name is Ashley Cleveland. I am a California native, moved to Utah probably about 6 years ago. All of my family is from Georgia. I am an ecologist by trade. I was an ecologist before I moved from California. I work for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, the National Park Service, USGS, and a few other conservation type land management organizations. And I moved to Utah so that I could become a city planner. The reason why I did that was because I really was interested in land management and how do we keep people healthy in regards to the outdoors and keeping a healthy environment. I'm invested in this work because I didn't see a lot of people like me in either field, whether it was environmental or city planning, but I do see a lot of us on the trail and recreating, but we're not really represented in, the engines that create change in both of those arenas, nor in the promotional materials. So I'm interested in this work because I really want to change the narrative that BIPOC communities are not there, because we are and we always have been. I'm also a volunteer in my spare time. I volunteer for a nonprofit called Outdoor Afro. And, when I'm not doing city planning or volunteering, I'm usually out with my young daughter trying to show her how to recreate in the outdoors and leave no trace and just feel comfortable in taking up space.
Ashley, so good to join you and everyone else here on the Zoom call and webinar. My name is David Robles, and a little bit about myself is that I grew up here in Salt Lake City, Utah, partially. The other part took place in Zacatecas, Mexico. During my time there, which was such a beautiful upbringing to mention, I connected with the outdoors, with cycling, mountain biking, visiting national parks, And one of the biggest shocks that I encountered as I continued to mature and move back to the States was the idea and construct that exists that restrains people of color, Black, Indigenous communities from the outdoors. It was so interesting to be in a place where everyone recreated, everyone took part in being involved in nature and being connected to it. And then I came back to the US and realized that it was very much so a white space. And that was extremely shocking for me to see kind of that privilege aligned with a particular race. A little bit more about myself is that my professional world is in education. I teach in a criminology and public policy and justice studies background. And then I also serve on the Salt Lake County Search and Rescue team. I think representation is important. I think taking up space is important. And I think having these conversations is at the core and foundation of bringing that importance to the surface. So thank you all so much for joining me today and allowing for me to be here.
Thank you so much, Ashley and David. It's a real privilege to be able to share this space for you. Our opening question, if you could answer briefly so we could dive into some more robust topics, is how do you see or experience white supremacy when you're out there recreating, or more broadly in outdoor recreation culture?
If you don't mind, Ashley, I'll go ahead and take a stab at that one. For me, it is such a interesting social cultural construct that exists within the United States in terms of where the privilege lies, and who owns the image and the publication of recreation. And that aligns itself with the white supremacist foundation and background. I think it all comes down to the ugly history of this country and the limitations and restrictions and condemnations that were applied to people of color, Black communities, Indigenous communities, and restricting them from leisure-based activities. And at the core of it all, it allowed for white communities and white populations to maximize their efforts and maximize their experiences within these spaces. And so white supremacy is very much so and very visible within all arenas of recreation, whether recreators of white background claim that they don't embody racist attitudes or racist actions. The very existence of these spaces and the displacement that it has caused for Indigenous people, Mexicans who used to be here, like my ancestors, who were pushed back and pushed south. And so these things, if we easily just trace back the timeline and look through the history of how these spaces were constructed and the limitations and restrictions that they were applied for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, you'll start to realize that the very existence of these spaces are white supremacist based. And it's a dichotomy that I continually struggle with in terms of connecting with them and being in these spaces and engaging in these spaces. But the idea of white supremacy is very much so alive and very much so thriving within these spaces.
For myself, I definitely would have to start off with the foundation. When we look at how our laws were formed, how our policies were authored and how they are still authored, and how the engagement processes around those policies are not necessarily inclusive still to this day. I definitely think I see it as a city planner in a lot of our zoning and land management practices from a municipal level all the way to a regional and national level. They're very separated. They don't necessarily always talk to each other. I definitely think in Utah, there's more room for collaboration. And I think I see that a lot more. We just have to focus on the engagement side. When I talk about zoning and city planning, I talk about, what allows for a single family home in one area as opposed to an apartment complex in another. What allows for an educational institution versus a hospital. And normally when you look at the more prime areas for the most natural landscapes that you want to recreate in, there's very low density single family housing around it, or very restrictive institutions like ski resorts and the like that don't allow for people to access it because it's very expensive, or it's the activity itself is exclusive because you receive training for it. That's also very exclusive. There's not very many options for beginner level training. So for me, at least, all of those actions have been representative of mainly a white male dominated arena. And it's been hard for everyone outside of those circles to gain access. So, that being said, they have put themselves in a light that is very supreme to everyone else.
Thank you, David and Ashley. I really appreciate the root cause that you bring it back down to when it goes to considering displacement, considering our foundations and the way that our communities are organized right now. So I appreciate you bringing in that very radically foundational concept. Cody has joined us on the phone. I want to introduce Cody Fetty, who is our third panelist. Cody, thank you so much for coming on to the panel today. We just got through some introductions and asked our first questions. So I'm gonna spin around and ask you to introduce yourself in whatever way makes sense to you. And then ask you to talk about why are you invested in outdoor recreation? What brought you to the work that you do? And what's a place or recreational activity that brings you joy?
Hello, everyone. Sorry for being late. My phone was being weird. I don't know what happened. But yat e she e kiani nishle bilagana basis chain klizatlana dashi na kaidina dashinale agut ego bila ishla dina nishle zitnit sadi nisha e kisana hawan. Hi, everybody. My name is Cody. I just introduced myself in my native language, which is the Nipazad Navajo language. I identify as a gender nonconforming butch femme, Bila Ishla'a, which just translates into five-fingered people. My family is originally from the Big Mountain Black Mesa area on Navajo. I currently reside in northern Arizona at the moment. And I'm sorry, can you repeat the questions?
Absolutely. Why are you invested in outdoor recreation? What brought you to this work? And what's a place or activity that brings you joy?
So at the moment, I currently work for Arizona Conservation Corps. I am on my last season for AZCC. I am on a trail crew. It's a roving trail crew, and I think that I jumped into conservation work at the beginning of, or at the when did I? It was last summer when I joined my first crew. I was on an ancestral lands crew, which is directed towards Native Indigenous peoples in the Southwest. And I was on a fencing crew. It was based in the Grand Canyon. It was pretty cool. Some of it was kind of shitty work. but I think the people made it worth it. And then I took a break from conservation work, and then I joined a chainsaw crew. But then all crews got put on furlough due to COVID in the spring of this year. And then I went back to work in July. I was on another chainsaw crew. That was my previous season from this one. I got chainsaw certified, and my chainsaw crew turned into a fencing crew again. But this time, instead of doing cattle guard fencing, I did elk fencing, which is really fun. Which was really fun and very complicated to do. And now I'm on a trail crew, and sadly, I will not be returning to AZCC next year, just due to personal reasons. And I feel like why I got involved in doing outdoor work was honestly because I was bored last year. I did not know much about being in the outdoors, except for what my family and my grandparents primarily have taught me. So it was a big shift in my life, and I feel like it was a good shift because I fell in love with doing outdoor work, and I feel like a lot of people put assumptions on me, and I guess people who identify like me, people who are feminine, who are androgynous, they have the assumption in their heads that I heard somebody say when I was on the call as a participant that the outdoor industry is labeled for cis hetero white men, and that's what I saw stepping into this work and like the outdoor industry, and I didn't like it. I get so tired of just seeing no representation for specifically queer, non-binary, gender non-conforming, Black, Brown, Indigenous people. So I really wanted to step out of my comfort zone and be that representation for my community back on Navajo, and also people that I know who want to learn these skills but are very uncomfortable and feel unwelcomed in the outdoor industry. So I wanted to take what I've learned, my skills, and implement it into my community. And I really want to implement back home in Black Mesa a roving chainsaw crew that is just made up of queer, non-binary, Black, Brown, Indigenous people. I think it would be really dope. And I'm sorry, can you repeat the last question?
A place or activity that brings you joy.
Thank you. I really enjoy chainsawing. Sadly, I did not get to do that much chainsawing on my previous term from this one because, like I said, it transitioned into a fencing crew. But I really enjoy chainsawing. I really enjoy being outside at my grandparents' place in Black Mesa. I really enjoy just, I guess, doing that type of outside work instead of something that is just laborious, I guess. I like waking up in the mornings and just having a cup of coffee and then going to the sheep corral and going to herd for the rest of the day. I think it's really fun. It's something that I grew up doing, and it's something that I still enjoy doing.
Awesome. Thank you, Cody. It's a pleasure to share this space with you. Now, since you brought up
Thanks.
representation, the next question that I would love to bring to you and our other panelists, David and Ashley, is about representation. So thanks to the efforts of a lot of organizations, inspirational people, and collectives that mainly I think we see online, there's a pretty robust movement for creating community by Black, Indigenous, and people of color for Black, Indigenous, and people of color in enjoying the outdoors. I think that Outdoor Afro is one of them, Latino Outdoors is one of them, and there are a whole lot of other sort of like individually moved efforts like so that you can see on social media. So my question for you all is, are these movements contributing towards the dismantling of white supremacy? If they are, how? And overall, what's the role of Black, Indigenous, and people of color healing and connection with the earth in dismantling white supremacy?
I'll answer that. I'll take a stab at that. I feel that Black, Indigenous, people of color led organizations dismantle white supremacy by simply existing and taking up space. They also do that by leading their own narrative and creating all of their own policies, practices, partnerships, director positions, memo of understandings with other organizations, really stepping into the role of doing exactly what their counterparts are doing, but for the benefit of their community. And I think it's just really, really beautiful because it's not necessarily that anyone else can't participate. It's just that once you begin focusing on yourself, you really get to focus on your needs and creating that gap in equity and access that really can't be looked at by anyone but you. And that's extremely important. I know that there are probably some white people that would beg to say that, all the organizations that they've created have not been exclusive to anyone, which is true. I guess in some cases they haven't necessarily written it down, but the way that you follow out your practices, begs us to believe otherwise. So if that's the case where, your narrative is at the center and everyone else is around it and are welcome to be around it, that's fine, but that's not changing the framework. So when BIPOC communities can do this for themselves and lead it for themselves with everyone else supporting around them and gathering, then you begin to have a narrative that's not centered around whiteness. And to the second part of your question, talking about why is this important for our healing and connection to nature, it's a giving back to our ancestors, or at least that's how I view it as. I'm an African-American person. I'm part of the African diaspora. And, we've always been people connected with nature. It's not until we got involved with colonialism and imperialism and capitalism that we began to be ripped away from it. As with a lot of Americans, with the food industry doing what it does and this and this and that. But it definitely speaks a lot to our own, very unique connection to the land and our own tales and our own ancestral practices when we can connect to the soil again. Now, American soil may or may not be our soil, but as far as ancestry goes, but we are a huge part of building this nation, and we are a huge part of the reason why this nation is shaped the way it is, from the landscape to American culture to the way that we view politics to entire movements that benefit everyone else.
Beautiful. Ashley, I resonate with everything you said, and I couldn't have said it better. One thing that definitely stood out to me was this idea of reconnection, and one aspect of many of these organizations a lot of the times is connecting, and you hear that word a lot, connecting Black, Indigenous, and people of color to the outdoors, to the environment, to nature. And I always want to go in there and just put the words RE right before and be like, it's reconnect. We are here to reconnect, because we lost that. That was at the core of so many of our cultures and so many of our belief systems. And it's really been uprooted from under us and taken away, and like many other things, and told that it's not ours, right? And shown that it's not ours. And so I resonate so much with you saying that, because I always just want to put in the words, the RE preface there, and say we're here to reconnect, and that's so important.
Yeah, I agree. It's like if you're going to tell the story, tell the whole story. You know, it's just like when they call us minority populations. When it's no, we make up about 80% of the globe as Black, Indigenous people of color. We're minoritized by the system. It's not something that we did to ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Oh my gosh. That was also beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I would just like to amplify that there is Indigenous networks on social media that do center Indigenous people in the outdoors, and they are femme-led. There is Indigenous Women Hike, and there was another one. Oh
Native
gosh,
Women
which
Run's a
one
good
was
one.
it? Yes, Native Women Run. Oh, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like looking through my oh, IndigiQueers. That one's a good one too. Um, Native Power Rangers. That one's another one. Unlikely Hikers. That one is another one. That one talks a lot about body liberation in the outdoor industry. Queer Nature is also a good one. Oh, but anyways,
So
think.
Cody, what are these orgs doing
Oh.
to dismantle white supremacy?
Oh, sorry, I was just about to answer. I think that it's very important to remind people that it isn't just about intrinsic value, it's about kinship when it comes to having a connection with the land. And when I say it's about kinship, it's the idea that your relationship with the environment is based on qualities like reciprocity, trust, and consent and accountability. Especially even with the non-human world, it seems like we are motivated to deal with issues like climate change because that's a part of being accountable and being in a reciprocal relationship with our environment. And I believe that we have moved past the point of people being our spokesperson or somebody running paid advertisements on social media talking about dismantling white supremacy. Because a lot of big influencers in Indian country talk a lot without actually taking action. And I think that that action also would also follow into what I had said when we talk about having a relationship with land when it comes to trust, consent, and accountability.
I love what you said about the reciprocal nature of your relationship with the environment. And I also really love what you said about we've moved past the time of needing a leader or a spokesperson for us. I think that's very, very important these days when it comes to anything from land management to your experience to how you recreate.
I think one of the complexities that I try to deconstruct in my mind as I agree with everything y'all have said. And it resonates heavily with a talk that I went to starring Angela Davis. And she talked about this machine, this like, white supremacist machine operating and, turning the wheels and doing what it has done for so many years. And this idea of and in her context was this idea of multiculturalism and almost pushing it to the side and saying you can play here and have your little groups and we will continue to turn this giant machine. And that's kind of where I struggle with, and it's hard because I think it does resonate heavily with gaining leverage and gaining as dominant and masculine the word sounds, power to push that forward. And so a part of me almost lives in between of like I exist in this space with the machine, right? And I'm existing there.
Yeah.
And then there's these subspaces of comfortability, of accessibility.
Yeah.
But I ask myself, and I guess the true question that I ask myself is, am I breaking down the machine? Like, or am I just over here playing in my own sandbox
Yeah.
while this machine continues to tear down the forest and continue to extract oil
Yeah.
and that's what I ask myself is creating these spaces holding white people accountable.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really interesting dichotomy, especially for BIPOC individuals who are now privileged, either that be through, educational attainment, working in academia, having leadership roles in recreation, and being the only one in their office. I definitely think that's something that we struggle with. A lot of times I think of Malcolm X's reference to the spook by the door, the whole changing the engine from the inside. And I think, especially with this wave that we've been seeing from the collective of outdoor rec and conservationism, where they want to do DEI work. And so they hire one of us to do DEI work, which is great, which is grand, which is awesome. Keep doing that. But don't stop there. We're not just there to be the token. We need to actually be in the roles that we're qualified to be in, to be directors, just doing land management, not doing the DEI work for you all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that heavily.
That's what real change is. But the whole multicultural needing your own space, I get that too, because sometimes it's not safe to always be in those spaces. So I think, having the option to have both is great because white people you have, identifiers for women's groups and other affinity groups of that nature. We should have all the options.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to at least keep me content for a moment. Thank
Just
you.
for another 30 days, just hang on.
Yeah. I'm just going to hang on until I read something else.
Oh, thank you all so much. I think that there are a lot of points you just hit in there. I mean, what you were just saying about this machine existing despite, what's happening for joy and community among different communities of color in outdoor recreation spaces. I wonder the same thing about land acknowledgements. And so that's another topic that I'd love to move to. It's certainly not ubiquitous, but increasingly common to tag or acknowledge the ancestral lands that you're recreating on when posting on social media or when doing outings with groups. And so I'd love for you to just give your perspectives on this to the audience here today. Do you think that land acknowledgements can contribute to dismantling white supremacy? Can you say why people should be doing it if you think that they do? If they are not yet making land acknowledgements? And then for people who have had this practice as part of what they do, what's a good next step for people to take in terms of land acknowledgements, decolonialism, reciprocal relationships with the land, and I think being allies to the indigenous communities whose lands that we occupy?
Sorry, I have like really bad signal. I'm actually at work right now, so I'm like breaking in and out right now. So I'm trying to go to another spot where I have good signal.
Okay, thanks, Cody. You can hop on in if you do find a better place that you do have signal. We just asked about land acknowledgements, and I think Ashley's off mute. If you want to give a stab at it.
No, yeah, sure. I definitely wanted to leave the floor open for Cody to speak first, considering that they are an Indigenous person. So please interrupt me at any time, Cody, whenever you get. I have seen that happen over the past couple of years. I always just want to make sure that is what Indigenous folks are asking us to do. You know, I do think it's a great idea in practice, and we do need to acknowledge it. But where did we start getting that from? And what would our local Indigenous people prefer us to do? Like for Utah, an example, is that something that they would prefer us to do, or is that just empty allyship? Are they really looking more for accomplices? That's just something that's always on my mind. I definitely think that as a country, we do need to have very open and honest conversations often at the forefront on the fact that we are on stolen land. And I feel like that should just be literally everywhere. Can we get a billboard? Can we stick it on all of the products made here in America? Can we can we just talk about that all the time? The fact that you are standing on something that's stolen. And then as far as being an ally, I don't feel, and this is just coming from a Black woman's perspective, I don't feel like people should call themselves allies all the time. Don't self-title yourself that. I feel like you need a marginalized person to actually give you that title for actually doing something, not just saying it or doing it because it's trendy. Even if it's well-intentioned, you can say, I'm hoping to be an ally, I strive to be an ally, but if you don't even have BIPOC people as your friends in your personal life, I don't know how you would have access to actually help them with anything or have deep conversations to say that you're an ally or an accomplice. And I definitely think that we're approaching the point where we need to move from allyship to accomplices. And so what Indigenous people would like for us to do beyond that, I'm not sure of, but I'm all ears.
Hello. Thank you. I think I found a nice spot with reception. I hope so. Please let me know if you cannot hear me.
You sound great, Cody.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah, I do not accept, nor do I really enjoy land acknowledgements. My job specifically gives land acknowledgements during training. I see the want and the need there to be better as an organization that is on stolen land. As an organization, the conservation movement has been violent to Indigenous people over time, as much as the extractive fossil fuel industries and wilderness areas, national parks, that use, like I have said, the intrinsic value argument. And oftentimes, those intrinsic value arguments were part of justification to disallow Indigenous people from living on and sharing equality in those lands. Indigenous people have been disposed and removed from those areas that, like I said, that the organizations use the intrinsic value argument for. And so, like I said, I feel like there is the need and want to be better and do better. But if there is no action behind those words, then a land acknowledgement does not mean anything to me or to my relatives. And I believe that land acknowledgement can also tie in with the popular phrase of land back that is big on social media right now, specifically I guess like native Instagram. And how that has also been co-opted from people who have these big followings and who label themselves as influencers on social media. They have really tainted what land back is. Same with other phrases or other actions as like decolonization.
You know, I once saw that on another social media account that colonization is kind of like an omelet, and you know, calling everything and like what the ingredients are doesn't mean that like you can separate it or undo the cooking of the omelet. So thank you both, Ashley and Cody. I really appreciate your honesty and just authenticity in saying, you know, what those land acknowledgements mean to you. David, did you want to add anything before we move on to the next question?
Yeah. So in my writing for Melanin Base Camp, which is something I didn't mention in my introduction for some reason, who knows why. So in my writing for Melanin Base Camp, it's something that all the other writers and our editor have continually brought to the surface and brought to the conversation table. It's something that we've done some fair share of research in figuring out and narrowing down what the action item is attached to land acknowledgements. And you know, I'm guilty of being in a position where I have provided land acknowledgements, and I guess my justification for doing so was simply the process of educating myself and bringing to surface the history of the displacement that exists, and you know, although that's extremely triggering and can resurface trauma, as someone who is non-Indigenous, I, you know, have used my privilege in that space to basically educate myself about the history of that land. And I don't know if that's looked at as a positive or not, but that's been my take in action in terms of providing those acknowledgements is not only for my own sake, but also for the sake of the audience to acknowledge and do their research. And I guess I have somewhat of a individualistic, intrinsic, and like hope that they do some research and invest time in that. But yeah, I'm definitely guilty of doing so, and I guess that's my justification for doing it. Now I guess I have to say like 5 Hail Marys or yeah.
I mean, you know, I think that there's a point of entry for everybody, and everybody's intentions like have their reasons. And I really appreciate just like the diversity of reasoning that each of you have provided us to think about today. So thank you. I'm going to turn to the audience right now. We have time for y'all to submit a question to the panelists. So if there's anything that you're burning to ask to each of the panelists or individually to Cody, Ashley, or David, please drop it in the Q&A. I also wanted to announce that we are going to have the White Accountability Workshop that will follow this panel discussion. It's not in this Zoom window. It's going to be in a separate Zoom meeting form where everybody can see each other. So the Uplift Climate account has been dropping the Zoom link into the chat box. And you will want that Zoom link to be able to join the White Accountability Workshop. Similarly, we do have space for other BIPOC to Black, Indigenous, and people of color to gather together and have some post-panel discussions. So if that's you and you want to have that space, please just note in the chat that you would like to have a people of color group gathering, and we will hold that space after the panel too. And we have one question from Amy that I think would be good to get to. Amy asked, how would you like to see media coverage address the issue of representation and access of outdoor recreation?
Oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to hop on this one. Just because, you know, as with all multi-rate, one second, hold on. Please go ahead, David.
So I think some of the biggest gaps we see with media coverage addressing this issue is just even admitting to the long history of guilt that exists with not bringing forth representation. And you know, I think when it comes to media coverage, we find and the viewership that's connected to that is heavily influenced by you know, what's going to provide the best shock factor, and these things don't bring forth the best criticism. And we're seeing it in spaces like even outside of outdoor recreation, like these sports leagues that are bringing forth and bringing forth these issues, and you start to see fans become divided so quickly. It's a good step forward, but I think media needs to reposition itself, and you know, it's difficult for them to tell themselves to no longer prioritize this capitalist approach and shift away from that and go towards more of an ethical approach. But I think until they do that, they won't necessarily bring forth a genuine and ethical stance on what this issue actually is, and how to approach this issue. So yeah, that's my stab at that question.
Yeah. Sorry guys, my neighbors knocked on my door asking if they wanted to pick up a Christmas tree for me. Sorry. Pandemic blues. I'm in my kitchen. So before I was interrupted, what I wanted to say about media coverage to address representation and access, this is something that I feel I'm very strong about when it comes to African American people, especially in this country. I know that, you know, multicultural communities have had, you know, their own struggles with how they're represented in the media in this country. But for Black people, especially for me, you guys have to understand that the trust has to be built. I mean, the depth of what I mean by that is, for example, this country used to make federally printed US postcards, okay, with white people lynching us on the front, okay? There used to be funny little kitschy salt and pepper shakers with black babies being given to like alligators and stuff. Okay, so anything in regards to media coverage and black people is just like a very, very deep conversation that needs to be had. And it's constantly going to be like a point of contention until we can get there. I don't think that when it comes to media coverage and making ads and stuff like that, it's as simple as putting a black face up there, although I highly appreciate it. When I go to REI now and I no longer see just Asians and white people in REI, I do appreciate seeing that one black family that's up there now. I do appreciate it. I think sometimes if there are people who are stepping into this work who have never stepped into it before, they need to be hiring people from those communities to not just be in the picture, but helping styling it. For example, like, why not hire a consultant to help you with the whole vision for your ad, right? So you don't get into hot water with representation. For example, like we had that whole debacle with Cheerios and how a lot of every time they show an interracial couple, it's always a white lady with a black man. They never show interracial couples as being like, a Pakistani woman with an Asian man. There's more things outside of biracial couples than black and white. So I think that's a very, very serious issue. And I think that especially for local brands here in the state, or just on a regional perspective, not necessarily a large brands like REI, even if you're just a small business, I don't think you should shy away from having multicultural people in your ads, BIPOC people represented in your ads. I just think you need to have a deeper conversation about how they're going to be portrayed before you take pictures with your vision. Stop leading with your vision.
Yes. Yes to all of that. I really enjoyed what you both had to say. Just like picking at what David said, talking about genuine and ethical stance, and then picking from, oh, I'm so sorry. Is it Ashley? No?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Wait. Okay, thank you. About trust, building trust with marginalized communities in the outdoor industry. And then also, oh God, I just lost it. I'm so sorry. I am so tired as well. Like I said, I'm at work right now, so I'm really sorry if I'm just like spitting out word vomit. But how you said how the media should be, I guess, supporting us or portraying us in the outdoor industry, I strongly believe that these communities, marginalized communities, are creating that own media for themselves and for their community. I really dislike, to be honest, I really dislike REI. I really dislike all of the outdoor brands and all of the outdoor stores, specifically in the area that I live in. A lot of the people in my area who are unsheltered, a big majority of them are Native, and they get profiled by these outdoor industries, and these outdoor industries are very hypocritical, or are hypocrites when it does come to the liberation of Mother Earth. Just for example, a lot of the local outdoor stores in Flagstaff run ads during Earth Day or whatever, and they have contracts set up with Arizona Snow Bowl, which sits on the San Francisco Peaks, which is sacred to my tribe and 13 other tribes. So I don't really, I really don't fuck with big outdoor brands. And like when I say that we are out here creating these resources for ourselves, for them to be accessible, for them to be affordable, I believe that we are creating that representation for ourselves in our own communities.
Thank you, Cody, and thank you so much, David and Ashley, for helping us unpack some of the different areas for that contribute to and also dismantle white supremacy in outdoor recreation. There were a lot of really good questions that we weren't able to get to today. Molly asked about decolonizing outdoor recreational spaces as individuals and contending with being passionate about a certain sport that has resulted in displacement and upholds white supremacy today, as well as taking action without beyond giving recognition and land acknowledgements. So for those who answered them or other people who are left with questions, I strongly encourage you to join our White Accountability Workshop that's going to be happening in a couple of minutes here. David, if you just posted a couple of handles to all panelists, if you want to post those to all of the audience as well. Ashley is Outdoor Auntie. David is on social media as well, and you can follow them as well as the organizations that they volunteer for on Instagram. Cody, do you want to shout out any websites or social media handles for folks to follow for you before we close out?
You can follow my jewelry account. It's called Glittering World Gal, Gal. It's on Instagram. And then also the Info Shop, KE Info Shop is also on Instagram. They're doing a lot of mutual aid work on the Navajo Nation pertaining to COVID-19.
Can I say one thing before we leave and depart? I just want to say that I appreciate all of you being here. I know that this work can be triggering for you, and I know that, you know, I'm not supposed to coddle you or anything like that, but I just want to let you know that I do believe that we can get there. I really do. And I do think, especially with our younger generations coming together and not being afraid to have these conversations, is the first way to do it. And, you know, James Baldwin, I highly suggest you read some of his work. He's a Black, queer, amazing, amazing leader in our community. You know, one thing he always says, if I love you, I must make you see the things that you cannot. And that's really what accountability is.
Beautiful. Ashley, that's really great. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Okay, thank you all so very much. And thank you so much to our audience for listening in and for participating. That's the end of our panel today. A recording will be sent out. So please send it to your friends, forward it along, and post about what you thought today on social media. You can tag us in your Instagram stories for us to repost about your highlights and what you learned today. So we'll be watching for those after the panel. And until then, I'm Olivia with Uplift. Follow us at uplift_climate, or you can subscribe to our newsletter at upliftclimate.org as well, where we will be sharing new updates about youth-led climate justice movements in the Southwest. Thank you, Cody. Thank you, Ashley. And thank you, David. Have a good night, y'all.
Thank you.